Hello friends, welcome back to Carla's Kitchen. We are doing up a Hawaiian meatball meal today. So I'm going to start off by showing you all of the ingredients, and then we'll get the meatballs going, get those in the oven, start the sauce, and get cracking. So from left to right here, I do use garlic salt in this particular recipe, as well as a minced garlic. I use a Cajun seasoning, onion powder, fresh cracked pepper, fresh ground sea salt, and a little bit of soy sauce. If you don't have a full bottle, keep a packet you get when you do takeout, and that'll work just as well. Just one little packet. It's just a little bit we add to the sauce to bring the flavors that much further. Again, I'm not sponsored by any of these companies, but there are a couple of brands shown on the table here, so we'll try to dance around that as delicately as possible. You can make it with any kind of rice, but I really enjoy the coconut jasmine rice with this recipe. It's another flavor profile for the dish, and it works pretty well for us. Additionally, I have a can of pineapple. Now, I prefer crushed pineapple in this recipe, and we're going to retain the juice as well. You can use the tidbits or the rings. Totally open to your preference in that case. This is something I don't know how we're going to get around the brand, but it kind of makes the dish. It's a Hawaiian sauce. It's for marinating or sauce, and we're just going to dump this right in the pan and use it as a sauce rather than a marinade. Additionally, here I've got fresh ginger. If you don't have fresh ginger available, no big deal. You can use ground ginger. It just won't be quite as pungent as using the fresh. You can also use, I've seen it in tubes in the store, similar where you find the already prepared garlic. You can find like ginger paste in a tube. Would probably get you a little more flavor than using the dried, but any of them will work. Today I've opted to use a yellow onion instead. And I've got plain breadcrumbs, 1 egg. I've got some leftover bell peppers. My store had the 3-pack on sale of red, yellow, orange, and I used half in another recipe the other day, and today I'm going to use the other halves that I retained in the fridge. Lastly, of course, to make meatballs, you will need ground meat. Ground round was on sale at my store, so I used half for taco night, and I'm using the other half for the Hawaiian meatballs today, along with those leftover bell peppers from taco night. So that's the rundown of the ingredients that are needed to pull off the dish. And again, cook to your taste. If there's something that I've shown that you just really don't like the flavor of, skip that and see if you still like the recipe. Okay, we're going to get started, as I said, first by making the meatballs. So I'm going to clear off some space here a little bit, get the meatballs rolling so those can get in the oven and cooking. And then we'll get the sauce started. Be right back. And we're back. I've got my meat into the mixing bowl. And this is just over a pound of meat. If you need more, you have a larger family, or you're cooking for a larger event, you can always double any recipe that you see. It's a little more difficult to trim them down if you need less. But think of, you can freeze leftover meals, or you can save them for later on in the week to have for lunch or a quick dinner. If you don't have time to make dinner every night, pull some leftovers out. I'm going to start by seasoning the meat. I'm going to throw some Cajun seasoning in here. And it just really adds flavor. It doesn't add a whole lot of heat unless you put, a cup of it in there. I'm going to throw some garlic salt in there, because the meatballs themselves should have flavors in addition to the sauce, in my opinion. A little bit of regular salt. And some ground pepper. Gonna throw about maybe a half cup to 3/4 cup of breadcrumbs in there. Plain breadcrumbs. And crack the egg. Now I'm gonna go ahead and use my hands to mix this up. I've already got my oven preheating to 375, and I've got my sheet pan laid out with the parchment on there, I find it's a little bit easier for cleanup that way. You know, it's not required to use the parchment. They don't really stick because the meat lets out a lot of grease as it's cooking. But I'm going to go ahead and mix this off camera with my hands. Just mix thoroughly until it's all blended. And then I'll be back in just a minute before we put them in the oven. And now the meat is mixed up and rolled out into balls. In that time it took me to do that, the oven has already come up to temperature. So they're almost ready to go into the oven. The last step I like to do is a light sprinkling of additional seasoning on top of the meatballs. Again, I want the meatballs to have a little flavor as well, not just the sauce that we're putting them in or the rice. Everything should have some flavor when it comes on your fork. So we're doing a little bit of Cajun seasoning here. And they're all about the same size. We're gonna put these in the oven and start checking them after 15 minutes at this size. If you prefer a little larger meatball, just know they're gonna take a little bit longer to cook. Next, I'm going over with some onion powder. I didn't put onion powder in the mix, but I am putting it on top, as well as fresh onion is going into the sauce that the meatballs are going to be served in. And then the last thing is a little bit of fresh cracked pepper. And the meatballs are ready to go into the oven. We're going to start checking them, as I said, in about 15 minutes. And in the interim, we're going to start prepping all our veggies to go into the sauce. You want to have a large pan with high sides available to you, and we're going to dice the entire onion that we had prepared already, that we gotten out with the ingredients. And this dish is going to be a little chunky, so you want the onion, you can of course always dice as large or as fine as you like, but I go with about a medium dice on this because we're also going to have crushed pineapple in the dish, as well as some minced, garlic, minced ginger, and the diced bell pepper. I'm going to go ahead and put the onion straight into the pan before it goes onto the heat, just for ease of illustration here. What we're going to want to do is get all of the onion chopped up, thrown into the pan, and then we're going to meet back over at the stove to get the onion started browning. While the onion's browning, or it's going to be translucent, really is all we're aiming for. We're going to prepare the ginger, and as soon as the onion begins to go translucent in the pan, we're going to add our ginger and let all the flavors build. So once the ginger becomes aromatic, after about a minute or so, then we're going to add the garlic, and then finally another about a minute or so for the garlic to become aromatic. Once that happens, then the rest of the dish moves quickly. You can add your bell peppers, as well as the pineapple with juice. You're going to retain the juice, don't drain your pineapple. And we're going to add the Lowry's Hawaiian marinade, soy sauce, and let that simmer while the meatballs finish baking. And then the last step, if you use a quickie rice like I have, it's 90 seconds in the microwave. That's the very last thing you need to worry about. If not, go ahead and get your rice started on another burner while you've got your sauce cooking and the meatballs are in the oven. One moment. Okay, got my onions going here in the pan, and they're starting to brown just a little bit. In the interim, while those are going, that's my oven sound, no worries. The meatballs are in the oven cooking. We've got about 10 minutes left to go on the meatballs. I've taken and diced up about an inch of the ginger root after peeling the skin off. We're just going to throw that in the pan. Once you can smell it, which fresh ginger doesn't take long at all, you can already start to smell it. Less than a minute to get aromatic for you. And then we're going to add a spoonful of the minced garlic. with the juice. I like to include the juice in my dish because it gives it a little extra flavor. And keep that moving. You don't want the ginger or the garlic to burn. That's not a pleasant flavor, smell, or taste. Next, flavor and taste mean the same thing, but here we are. So get that moving around in there. Just let it come up to temperature a little bit. You should be able to smell the dish starting to come together at this point. Keep stirring everything. Once it smells like it's cooking, we're going to add a little bit of soy sauce, maybe, you know, packet worth, or a little bit less, maybe like half a packet if you have a takeout packet. Perhaps that's around a teaspoon, perhaps a little more. Let's get everything mixed in flavor-wise here. And I just coarse chopped the tricolor bell peppers from earlier. I'm going to throw those in our skillet. Stir them around, let them take on the flavors as well. I'm on a medium heat here in the oven. On the burner, rather. The oven's at 375, cooking the meatballs. Okay. Let that keep going. Let everything get nice and warm. It smells so delicious. Okay. The soy sauce so we don't have spillage here necessarily. As you hear, everything starting to get crispy and bubbly. Now that we've added some moisture to the pan, it's going to cook a little bit better unless the scorch marks are gone from the bottom of the pan now, as you can see. Okay, next up, I'm going to go ahead and grab my crushed pineapple, which I've already opened before I started over the fire, and I'm just going to dump the can. Everything's in. And we're going to stir that around to let the flavors melt even further. It smells delightful. Let that get warm for a moment. And the last step here, before we just let simmer, we're going to add the entire bottle of the Hawaiian sauce. And if you feel like there's a little bit just the coating on the bottle, you can put a little splash of water in there. And shake the bottle up. And go ahead and pour that in as well. Mix everything around. And we're just going to let that go for a little while on the stove top while the meatballs finish cooking in the oven. I don't even start the rice. If I'm just using the microwave minute rice, I don't even start it until everything is out of the oven and off the stove top, because it only takes 1:30 and you want your rice to be fresh and hot, while the meatballs need a few minutes to cool down. You want to dab the grease off of them if there is any, depending on the blend you use. If you use a 90-10, you might not have that much grease to deal with, but that's not what was on sale for me this week. So the other reason for parchment, it helps to just tidy the pan up a little bit when you're using a higher fat mix. And you know, we can debate whether it's better to have the healthier lower fat mix, or if you get more flavor with the fat at a later date. That's all a personal choice. If you choose to use the low fat mix, go for it. Sometimes you just grab what's on sale in bulk, and for me in this case, I was able to make 2 meals out of a 2.5 pound pack of meat, and the bell peppers were on sale, so I pulled together 2 different recipes that would use half of each of those, and save my family a little bit of money while we're at it. So, you know, we all have different priorities as we're in the kitchen. and my main purpose is just to share this recipe with you because I think it's delicious. You can make everything your own. You can do any substitutions, or add more bell pepper. If you really like bell pepper, add more. You use different onion. Totally up to you at this stage. So we're just gonna let that come up to a boil. Once it does, we're gonna turn it down to a simmer. Let the sauce simmer on in the oven for a little while. We do want the peppers a little bit of snap, but we want them to incorporate and get that good sauce to be sticky so that it'll coat everything, because eventually you're going to pour this over your meatballs. You can, when the meatballs are finished, add them to the sauce and let them simmer in the sauce a bit if you like. However, here in my house we don't do that because, again, we have a vegetarian, so the meat stays a separate dish and we just pour the sauce over top of our rice and meatballs. We'll be back shortly to show you how it all looks put together. See, now we're bubbling. Pause. Okay, now I see the bubbles breaking the surface here. I'm going to give it one more stir. And I'm going to reduce the flame down to a low and just let it simmer. The meatballs are finished. I've let the sauce continue to simmer on the stove top, and what I've done is just lined a plate with a kitchen towel here, and we're going to move the meatballs over and let some of the grease be absorbed onto the paper towel, kitchen towel, same thing. While we let that sauce just come to its glory. At this point, the meat can rest. All it's going to do is maintain the juices inside. I always try to let meat rest after cooking for at least a few minutes. It's not going to get cold on you anytime soon, so don't worry about that. Go ahead and move all your meatballs over. Let the paper towel absorb any of the grease that didn't get picked up by the parchment paper. The pan does still get dirty, but it's just far less. So when you use the parchment paper on the pan, I would also suggest letting that grease cool for a few minutes before you try to remove the parchment from the pan and throw it away, so you don't burn yourself. And I'm just placing them where they'll fit onto the kitchen towel here. Last one. And we're just going to let those sit for a few minutes. Again, it's dual purpose. The meat is resting, so it's any of the juices that are retained in the meatball are going to stay in there, and it's going to cool to an edible temperature, as well as absorbing some of the additional grease that didn't stay on the sheet pan. Sauce is still simmering. I'm going to go ahead and make the rice, and we'll be back in just a minute to assemble this goodness. Welcome back, and the last steps here are to enjoy the fruits of your labor. I've got some of the coconut jasmine rice in my dish. I'm going to add a couple of meatballs, and again, if you don't have need to separate your proteins from the sauce, I would recommend actually putting the meatballs into the sauce to simmer for a little bit. We just do it a little differently here, so I'm going to spoon it right over top of my dish. Steaming hot. I might cut that in half to avoid burning myself. And take a big scoop and enjoy.